Okay, so let's start this class of today. It's going to be about our cities and the ways in which collective intelligence can help us build different, smarter cities than in the past, right? Based on the data, the flow of data, the intelligence that we as citizens generate, and that many times make available to whoever is there intending to harvest this information from social networks, from our interaction with government agencies, and so on and so forth. Morning. So we've chosen 4 papers for this class. It's actually not 4 papers. 2 of them are not academic papers, but anyway, 4 different texts that we'll be discussing. I will start with I'll start with Good Child because it's the first one that we have mentioned there. Let me see if I can find it here. Is this it? Yeah. Citizens as Sensors: The World of Volunteered Geography. Right? You hear a lot this expression, citizens as sensors, because we as individuals are leaving a track of information behind us whenever we interact with electronic systems. Right? That was not the case when we interacted with, let's say, businessmen on the streets. Like if we got into a shop downtown and asked for some information, checked for a product, checked the price of a product or whatever, that would not be recorded when we were using the traditional means, right? Like going to the shop directly. Now that we do this electronically, many times we want to check the price of a product, we get to a website. Then when we get to the website, we leave a track. We leave information behind, right? All websites have logs that are either kept by the people that publish that website, or by someone else, like Google, for example. Google has this tool, Google Analytics. I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with it. Surely the ones in computer in the computer science know it well, but for those of you in business and in other areas, look for Google Analytics later and see Google provides anyone with a tool that you include in your website, and then it provides you with a lot of information about the way people navigate inside your website. And that information, if well analyzed, can bring you knowledge that can be used in the future for decision making. Okay? One very simple thing that most of these log systems have is they know where you came from. So for example, how did you get to a specific website? Where did you come from? Did you come from a Google search page? Or did you come from another page that linked to that page directly? Right? This information is available, and there's a lot of other information that is available. And in general, citizens are not aware of the track that they're leaving behind. I hope that with the text that you had to read for today's class, even those of you who are not in the computer science department, will have realized that there is a lot of information that is left behind. In fact, one of the authors, well, that report by Kate Green, the second paper that we'll discuss, the second text that we'll discuss today, says that we leave digital breadcrumbs behind us. The same way as in that story of John, is it John and Mary going in the forest looking for, that they go dropping little pieces of bread so that they know their way back. except that those pieces of bread there are eaten by birds, and here it's not breads, it's it's actually something that will remain there much longer and can be used for much more time than what we could expect before the birds come and eat the bread, right? Well, anyway, let's start with citizens as sensors, the world of volunteered geography. This text was written by a geography professor, right? So the focus here is on maps and on how maps can be built together by a bunch of volunteers instead of geographers or cartographers or whatever, the way they used to be done in the past, right? Cartography has always been a very tough subject. It requires a lot of understanding of mathematics to convert whatever measures you have into a map, and we, of course, we have several different maps using different ways of showing on a flat surface a geography that in this planet here is sort of round, okay? So cartography was not business for an amateur in the past. But nowadays that we have a GPS in our pocket, we can go around and take measures, and these GPS devices are so precise. In many cases, the difference between the actual location and what your mobile phone is telling is just a meter or so. It's very good for most even map applications, right? I understand here that of course the author shows us some of the problems with this technology. He even shows in part of the text that the city where he lives, Santa Barbara in California, it seems that there is a part of the city there that is not mapped because Google's maps have an error coming from the right, an error coming from the left, and then there is let's say there's some dozens of meters there that are not shown. So if we wish to have something really precise, at least at this stage, it's still not going to be through this kind of mechanisms. But it's good enough for most applications, and we have been using it, for example, for, well, the most basic use is to use it in our cars to know the directions in the city. We don't need to know our directions any longer. We just need to have an address. That address is going to be converted electronically into the coordinates of that address, and then again by some mathematical algorithm, the software will calculate the fastest or the shortest way of going from where I am to where I want to be, even taking into consideration street directions, streets that go one way or another, and that seems, and that actually is very interesting for most people. But of course, even when we're using that kind of system, we are leaving a lot of information behind us. And this is one of the things that we have to also be concerned about when we discuss collective intelligence. I see that Magalhães was just before the class here, he was saying, well, now that we see here a few of the things that we discuss in another course that I teach, Technology and Society, of course there we have a much more critical perspective to all of to the way that we are sharing information, or that we are giving information away, because we never know who is going to use it and for what purposes. So you'll see that I have, whenever I'm talking to you about the miracles that these technologies can provide us with, I'm always also a little cautious, because the information is not necessarily neutral, and even if it were neutral, the uses that people are going to make of such information are not neutral. So we've already discussed very quickly the other day something about open data, for example. It's very good that we have now most government agencies providing data that citizens can analyze and can say, look, you as our employees, as we all public workers are not doing the job that we wanted, because you know the numbers that you're showing us here, when we analyze them, we see that you're not doing what we voted on you for, right? So it's good to have that information. It's good that people start analyzing that information. It has made courses like those on data science much more important than they were in the past, because there's a lot of data that needs to be analyzed. But at the same time, we could critically ask, who will benefit from those open data that we have? Is it data that will, definitely we can think that it will benefit the citizens, that will be able to control what is happening in a better way. But at the same time, do we as citizens in a developing country have the tools, the means, and the knowledge to make sense out of this data? Or is it data that will be crunched by, you know, someone in the Silicon Valley to result in or to achieve the interests of some North American company that actually does have much more power to do this analysis? For example, the last paper that we'll discuss today, that large-scale study of city dynamics and urban social behavior using participatory sensing, has Thiago Silva, one of the professors here in our department, as an author. He worked together with other guys from Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, which is one of maybe one of the places in Brazil where there is more studies being carried out trying to make sense of this enormous amount of data that is being made available either by governments or by ourselves as we move around in the digital world. But we do nothing compared to what the North Americans do. They have much more money, much more to invest in this kind of research. They have many more brains to work on that. And therefore, when I keep thinking that our opening the Brazilian government data makes or helps much more other governments or companies or interests much more other governments and companies from other countries than ourselves. We'll have to catch up. We'll have to do a lot of research here to make sure that we make use of this, not more than they do, but at least so that we can also benefit and get that knowledge and take the good decisions that we have to take in order to favor our own communities, our own cities, and not just provide information to others that will definitely or that could use that not necessarily in favor of us, but eventually even against us, right? And in fact, most of the criticism that we have about the amount of data that we are leaving behind us is that even if we think about companies, right? Of course, the discourse is always, well, don't worry, we'll be using all this information to provide you with a better product, with a better service, with with a value proposition that suits you better because we know you better, right? But can we really believe that? I mean, in a relationship between customer and supplier, where there is always this mentality that for one to win, the other will have to lose. Can we really believe, and it shouldn't necessarily be like that, but this is, let's say, in general, when we think about profiting, the profit is something that you get, right? That is more than just payment for your labor, right? So in a world that is searching for profit, wherever profit is there to be obtained, can we believe that companies will actually use this information in our benefit as customers? I think we have to be a little naive to think like that. So there is a lot of issues, and I'm just here addressing some of Magalhães' concerns. Yes, if we, when we're thinking about the possibilities, there are a lot of very interesting possibilities, and in general, the ones that we'll be showing you in this course are possibilities for the good, right? But there's also a lot of danger here if we are not cautious about how we work with this information. And we haven't started discussing the first paper yet, but there is something that disturbs me when I see someone like that researcher of paper number 2 about reality mining, when he says that he's aware of privacy issues, and he says, while the promise of reality mining is great, the idea of collecting so much personal information naturally raises many questions about privacy, Pentland admits. And then he says, it's crucial that behavior logging technology not to be forced on anyone. It's not just a matter of not being forced on anyone. We're not being forced into it, but we're still, at least we're not being forced with someone putting a gun on our head and saying, you have to use this, right? But we're giving candies, we're giving little rewards for using all this technology. And in fact, in his paper, in his text, those rewards are there, and who is going to refuse it just based on the fact that you're not obliged to use it, right? So we have to go much further than that in discussing critically even laws that should be passed on Congress to tell how companies can legally use data that they get from us, and not only companies, governments as well, right? In fact, I think many times we have to be more concerned about governments than companies, because governments tend to be even more powerful than companies, right? How will this data be used? And not saying, well, look, I admit that we are invading people's privacies, but so they should be aware and they should give us permission to do that. We are giving a lot of permission to do many more things that we should were a little more conscious about this, and not individually. If we were a little more conscious collectively, right? Being more conscious individually doesn't help, because we live in society. It's decisions that we have to take as groups that will matter. Individuals will either try to, to rebel against what the masses are doing, but they will be dragged, or they will have to, live in a completely different world. They'll have to move to Honey Island and live there in a tent until I don't know if I told you this story about, I definitely told in the other class that I had a brother who once rebelled against society and said, I'm going to live at Honey Island. And he went there and lived there for 6 months or so until he set fire on the tent he was living, and then he came back home and said, look, I have to reintegrate myself to society because my tent just burned. So it's difficult for us to decide that we are going to fight the rest of mankind. So we as a society will have to demand that even our researchers are not so. When I read that, I said, what a jerk, right? I said, how can a researcher be so cynical about the way you deal with the fact that I realize that there is some privacy issues here, but people should be aware, and then they decide if they want to give away their privacy or not. We are not deciding that on our own, right? It's a decision that we're taking collectively, and collectively, at least up to now, what we are deciding is, yes, we'll give it all away because there is some candy there for us, and the candy is in the short run, and in the long run, we'll all be dead anyway, so right, we're not being that responsible with respect to that. But anyway, let's go back to our first paper. So the geographer. As this is an academic paper, I think we should start doing something that is very good for researchers to do when they read an academic paper, is checking if the academic paper that they're reading has some patterns that are expected in an academic paper, right? I'm not saying that all academic papers have to be written according to a specific format that doesn't allow for any creativity, let's say. But I have to tell you that academic research is not a creative matter when we're referring to form. You want to be creative about your objective, have an objective that is really relevant and that nobody thought of. You want to be creative about methods of doing the research, thinking of ways that are different to what others did before, but at the same time that will be accepted, because if you think of a method that is creative but other people will think that is not reasonable, then being just creative is not good. But you can't, usually we don't expect people to be creative in the way of writing their papers, because an academic paper is almost like a report, right? You're actually, the purpose of an academic paper is reporting to others, to the academic community, the results of your research, or if it's a more, let's say sometimes we have a more philosophical paper or a more, we're debating ideas, so it's a paper where you want to convey your ideas, your arguments, and see if they make sense to the rest of the community, right? So in general, and I will say that the two papers that we will analyze today, the two academic papers, the Citizens as Sensors and the one large-scale study of city dynamics and urban social behavior, do not follow exactly what I would suggest as the best format. But you have to first understand that the best format depends on the academic community you're in, right? So if you are in a, let's say, philosophy community, they don't do any empirical research. Philosophers don't think of surveys that they can or interviews with people or anything. Philosophers just think, right? So all their topic is about argumentation using their reasoning. In more, let's say, in physics or even in the hard sciences in general, you're very attached to the empirical evidence that you have, or in some of it, because you also have very theoretical physics in which you're almost like a philosopher, right? But you have to check who is the community that you're writing to, right? And but I would say that in general, for example, an abstract should tell what you're doing, which is basically what was your objective with the paper? What is your intention with that paper? It should include the methodology that you used to achieve that result, to achieve that objective. And it should give us some ideas of the results you obtained. I think that this is good practice in any field, because the abstract is not supposed to be like a movie trailer, right? That you start showing what you're going to do and then you stop and leave the audience really curious, and then they'll have to pay the ticket and go to the movies and watch the film, right? That's not the intention of an abstract. An abstract is there as a replacement for the whole for the whole paper. At least for those who are not going to, who will read the abstract and decide this paper is not for me. This is very important in a world where we don't have time to read everything. We'll have to choose what we'll read. So the abstract should have that honest purpose of being a replacement of the whole paper, so that the reader doesn't necessarily have to read 20 pages to at the end figure out that the paper was not for him or for her, right? So it would be wise to always have the objective, the method, and the results. I understand that some areas, if you're only going to reason with your thoughts, maybe the methods is difficult to explain, right? The method is your reasoning only. So maybe in some cases you wouldn't need the method to be so explicitly expressed, but definitely for applied computing, for business, what are their areas we have here, for psychology, for sociology, all these areas usually require that you say in which way you intend to solve that problem or answer that question related to your objective, right? So what is Mr. Goodchild's problem here? What does he want to convey with this paper? What was your idea of his objective? You read the whole paper. Forget what he wrote in the abstract, but what was the main message of the paper, which would probably try to respond to the research question or to the objective of the paper? Or at least, what does he do with this paper? Who wants to take a guess?
I think he gathers some pictures, millions of pictures, taking out mobile phones.
We're still talking about citizens as sensors. You're probably talking about the other paper. This is the one that where he's talking about maps and how maps evolved and how we can involve people to help build these maps. Also, some already telling what his objective was, right? To show that the objective is to show that map building today is something that can benefit from the participation of the crowds or the participation of people that are not necessarily, right? I think this is his major objective, right? He's trying to convince us that this is a way of creating maps.
For updating them, it's not possible to update all information.
And then he shows his argument is that maps that were used to be built by cartographers take very long to be updated, and there are information there that are difficult for regular people like us. For example, it's difficult for one of us to actually draw the map. Although it is much easier now that we have GPS, we can ride our car around the area that we want to map, and the map will appear in our screen, right? But it's definitely one thing that the traditional way of building maps doesn't allow for updating is if, for example, if the direction of a street changes, and if that's something that will have to be surveyed by a bureaucratic agency, government agency, how long will it take until this change is reflected in the official maps? Probably very long. But if it's a map that is built by humans, and mainly humans that have become sensors, the same day that something happened, there will be already, actually, whenever it happens, there will be someone already saying, look, there is something here is different. Right? That's what Waze does, for example, for traffic. Right? If a street has been, stopped for construction, or if the mayor decided to change, as it happened here in Curitiba recently, change the directions in which traffic flow, this will be reflected in virtual maps almost immediately, because users are able to say that straight away, and other users maybe will moderate that and check if it's true, so that just to stop someone from sabotaging the system. This is something we'll discuss that in one of our classes, two classes from now. But that's a huge problem that we sometimes have. People that will go the opposite direction than everyone else. Most people are there trying to help a system work efficiently, but someone just for the fun or for whatever other malicious purpose could try and sabotage the system. So you have to have also ways of preventing those that are trying to affect collective intelligence in a negative way, from preventing them from being successful. But anyway, so the objective is clear. In fact, and now going back to the abstract, notice that maybe the first 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines until when the author is talking about Google Earth and other virtual globes and are encouraging volunteers to develop interesting applications using their own data. Up to there, the only thing that the author is talking about is context information, right? When he starts saying, I review this phenomenon and examine associated issues, that's already sort of the objective, or at least sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference between what the objective was and what the paper actually does, right? I myself always prefer to explicitly say what my objective was, right? Because sometimes or what my objective is with the paper, right? Not necessarily what my objective was. Sometimes when we are writing or when we are doing research, we change objectives in the middle of the way, and the reader is not interested of what our previous our original objective was. They're interested in knowing what you do in the paper that you have. So I prefer to write what the objective of the paper is. So what I will be able to provide the reader with after he or she's read the whole paper, right? But in this paper here, they more like describe what they did, and that's what they write here, right? I mean him, Mr. Goldsmith. Goldsmith, no, Goodchild. There is no explanation in the abstract about how, so the method. I understand that he's using more like reasoning here, right? The way this paper was built was using reasoning and trying to show us, he writes in a more, let's say, in a way that he wants to convince us with arguments, right? So maybe this is why he didn't find it necessary to write, well, the methodology that I used here was so and so, right? So I excuse him for not having the methodology in this paper, because it's more like an argumentative paper. It's more like an essay, right? Not a theoretical, empirical paper where he's contrasting what he would expect from the theory that he was aware of before doing the experiment or before doing his research with the results that he obtained afterwards, right? So in this case, but there is also no results. It would be good if he said, in addition to describing what he did, saying, okay, and we get to this, or my main arguments, or my main findings, or the things that I really want to convey are this. Okay, but anyway, it's let's say this is this paper does not follow the model that I usually use, and that I see most people using for a theoretical empirical work, because it is not a theoretical empirical work. So he's excused, he's allowed it to go a little freer with his reasoning. Most of you, when writing your dissertations or thesis, will have a theoretical empirical work, right? You have some theory that you develop beforehand, then you develop some empirical work to try to test your hypothesis, or to test the ideas that you had based on the theoretical assessment you've made of previous research, the literature review or whatever, and then you analyze your results based on what you could expect from the literature review, or from right. That's the basic theoretical empirical work that we usually do. This is not the case here, so the author goes in a slightly different track, but I would not suggest anyone to go this way with your work, right? Maybe the first new thing that a researcher that is new to the field can bring is fresh data that nobody else has, that is analyzed accordingly to whatever knowledge that there is already available, with the intention of pushing knowledge a little further ahead, right? And that's usually the intent of a theoretical empirical study. Well, anyway, let's see how he goes with the paper. When I read a paper like this, and I hope you, when you do that also, you do the same. Yesterday, when I was rereading this these papers that I hadn't read since last year, when I marked, for example, a few expressions that I think that should go to our wiki, where we have those definitions and things. For example, one of them, user-generated content. What is user-generated content? It may be obvious for us. Well, it's content that is generated by users, but it's an expression that would be important to be defined there in our definitions, so that when we refer to something like that in our texts, we are meaning that thing. So you'll see that many collective intelligence initiatives will be generated based on user-generated content. Not all, right? Sometimes it's not user-generated. Sometimes it can be generated, for example, by a government office, considering that now they are obliged to make all their data explicit, open, right? So it could relate to users, to the user's relationship with those agencies, but it's not generated directly by users, right? So he also mentions here another term, volunteered geographic information. Why does he consider that is volunteered? Then you may say, okay, but the word volunteered there's not two different interpretations for that. Volunteered, it's because it's offered by the user in a spontaneous way. It's not something that he's obliged to provide, right? Okay, but is all user-generated content volunteer? Would, for example, a photograph that you post on Instagram be a volunteered, it's definitely a user-generated content, but was that generated in a volunteer, as a volunteer? Well, maybe he generated, the user generated that in a volunteer way to show his friends, so that his friends can know what he's doing, right? But maybe the intention was not to voluntarily provide the information of where that person was, what that person was doing, and so on and so forth, to whoever is willing to assess and analyze that information. So notice that there are things that we should explore in our discussion of, it's definitely, whoever posts a photo on Instagram is not doing that because someone put a gun on their head and said, come on, publish that, right? They're doing that in a volunteer way. But what are they volunteering? What are they aware of? What are they doing on purpose, and what are they doing without even being aware of? Those things need to be, I think, addressed, or at least we should think of them, because that's something that our legislators would have to think when defining new legislation with respect to how data could or should be used. Is the user aware? If he or she were aware of the way the information would be used, would he or she still agree with it? So volunteer, in a volunteer way, allow use, or they would say, no, I don't want my information to be used for that purpose. Notice there is a tricky thing here with respect to what really is a volunteer content that is provided, or that is volunteer content. Okay? This will probably become even clearer, this problem or this issue, when we discuss the other paper that is trying to make sense of all this information. Here, the geographer is just, I think most of the people that are contributing with maps here, they're actually aware of what they're doing. At least when they're saying, I want to help improve this map, or I want to help improve the content of this map, providing additional information. But think of, for example, those photos that were taken at Ayers Rock in Australia by some 2,500 people. It's in figure 3 of the paper. Where is that? Oh, hang on. No, here. Think of this. Were these people aware that the photographs they were taking would or could be used by not just by other people? When they think, okay, it's going to be used by other people that are visiting this place or that are willing to visit this place, so I find that okay, because it will help others, know about this place. But notice that we have there, we can't see here very well, but we have the photo of the person. We have when this person was there. We have there's a lot of additional information that is made available together. Is this all this other information also voluntarily provided? Okay, somehow, at least if we are to discuss collective intelligence, we'll have to have a chapter in our work in which we'll discuss some ethical issues related to collective intelligence. And so I hope that we go a little further than what did Mr. Pentland, of saying we should not oblige anyone to do that. It's too naive, right? I understand that maybe we are all obliged, right? Indirectly, but it's our duty. Anyone who gets to be a little more aware of the track of information that we all leave behind, it's our duty to talk about what we can do with that data for the good, but at the same way, how should we protect ourselves from having all that information used for the bad, because it could just as well be used with those purposes. Okay? He talks about a mashup, the ability to superimpose geographic information from sources distributed over the web. This is something that maps traditionally didn't do, because it was even difficult to get the most basic information in the maps. But now we can have the map of the city and several other maps on top of it that show, for example, how people move in the city. It will be shown in the other paper. Well, where people go in the morning, where people go at lunchtime, where people go in the evenings, patterns that change over the week. All those things are discussed in the other paper, but we can superimpose different layers of information on top of the maps we have, improving the amount and the quality of the information we have, mainly if we can relate this information one to the other and make sense of it. Okay? And then he starts talking about enabling technologies. And among the enabling technologies, the first one that will appear there is our main technology here, Web 2.0. Our next class is going to be specifically about Web 2.0. But basically, the difference between, if we could call it Web 1.0, of course nobody called it Web 1.0 because nobody thought that there would be a Web 2.0 later, right? So, but now that we have Web 2.0, let's say that Web 1.0 was the static web, not very dynamic in the sense that the users were more passive in the way that they interacted with that. Of course, they could choose which hyperlinks to follow, but users were not, or at least most users, those that were not developing the content, the web pages, would not define their own or define ways that others would go around on the web. They would not edit or improve or change anything that was there. Web 2.0 is not, technologically, it's not any different to Web 1.0. It's the same technology. There was no additional technology included there. It was just that we, as users and as developers, realized that we could go a step further and allow users to have a much more active role in developing the contents of the internet. And this is what Web 2.0 actually is. So he says here that by the early 2000s, the ability of users to supply content to websites had grown in sophistication. Let me see if I find this here in the... It's somewhere around here. Had grown in sophistication to the point where it became possible to construct sites that were almost entirely populated by user-generated contents, with very little moderation or control by the site's owners and very little restriction on the nature of content. So this is what rules most of the successful Web 2.0 ventures of today. If you think of Facebook, for example, Facebook doesn't publish any content there except for now for advertisements that they want to show us according to our own previous interactions with the platform, right? But most content is a user, the users that provide, right? Then another technology that he considers that was very important here, and notice why I say that this paper is more like an essay than really an academic paper. Notice that he keeps talking about the things without providing a lot of citations to other work, right? It's his reasoning. And this is why I say that you should not attempt to write this way. Mr. Goodwill, don't recall his name, Goodchild. Mr. Goodchild is a professor at Berkeley, a good university. Whatever he writes, we'll be reading and discussing, right? I'm not saying that you're not as bright as he is. You're starting. So when we're starting, there will not be a lot of people interested in reading what we're writing, except if we show that we are doing things with a lot of criteria and that we have also, we know that Mr. Goodwill, to write what he's writing, that he has a life of, let's say, study, and that although the references do not show up here, that well, he's actually talking from his experience. So that's usually not the way research goes, mainly if we're junior researchers. We're not talking about our experience, right? We're not writing essays. We are slaves of the authors we read and the data we collected, right? We're imprisoned by those. We cannot say anything. There's nothing to be said that will not be considered pub talk, things that you talk while you're drinking a beer, in an academic paper. It's your authors, the authors that you read, who said something and then you have to quote, or it's data that you collected through your empirical work, and then of course you don't have to quote because that's obvious that that's data that you and then whatever analysis you make is also only based on that. You're not based any of your analysis on things that I find that things are this way. No, there's no place for your own, there's no place for yourself in your own work. At least not until the very end, in the conclusions, after you have concluded based on the facts, on your data, and the comparison that you made between your data and what others had done before. After all of that, maybe you're free to say, look, but in the future, I think that we should go this way or that way because I have a feeling that this is a promising way to go or whatever. In general, at least in a very positivistic approach, we do not have the right to be ourselves.
This is not a good reference.
This paper, what I'll say, this is an essay. This is an essay, right? An essay is usually something that either someone that is already a very known author in the area. We are interested in essays by someone who has a lot of experience. Because then we say, yep, tell us about your experience. Your experience is valid to us. But it's not even being the result of someone's experience, I would say it's not an academic paper in its essence, right? Let's say as an editor, I would have no problem publishing an essay by someone who's a very cited author in the field. Even if it has no references or very little references, he's talking about his experience. I'll consider that as a historic, not a historical, it's part of the not history, but the story of an area, right? This person is important for what he or she has already done, and let's give them the chance of talking more freely because they may give us good hints or good ideas, but their work may not even be citable if it's only based on their experience. Notice, at least from a very positivistic perspective, right? So then he talks about georeferencing, where we usually use latitude and longitude as ways of precisely saying where something is happening, or or the location that we want to talk about. He mentions here this universal transverse Mercator, which is for us in our areas here is not very relevant, but the fact again is that when we build maps, even the coordinates, the regular coordinates, are not as precise when we flatten a map that was round and we put it into a flat map. So there are distortions there, and this is one way of dealing with these distortions. Would be very important for a cartographer, not very important to us, mainly because you will even, if we're doing research here in social sciences or applied social sciences or computing, someone has already coded an algorithm to do all of this for us, but it's important for you to know that we don't just use coordinates directly, depending on the kind of map that we are dealing with, right? Geo tags, another term that he considers important there. And tagging means, again, it's a collective intelligence thing, because users can go there and put a tag. Well, this, for example, I could put a tag on my apartment building and say, well, this is where I live. It's a piece of information. I don't know. Originally, it could be relevant to my friends that could go there, and when they wanted to see where I live, they would be able to find, okay, that's where Alexandre lives, okay? And in fact, in many collective intelligence ventures, what is done is that you make people include information because they think that information is going to be good to their acquaintance, to their friends or family. But of course, when they put that information there, it's available to everyone. And again, there's all those issues about privacy that we are giving away, but that are present. Right? GPS, not much to be said about GPS. We all use it, but he claims here that GPS has sparked a number. Let me just go a little further here. Where is that? GPS has sparked a number of interesting VGI activities, such as the creation of maps by walking, cycling, or even driving. So notice that when we do that as users, we have our sensors in our pockets, usually our mobile phones. We drive around, we have some software that relates to the GPS and tells where we are. That information in latitude, longitude coordinates is converted using all those algorithms to make sure that depending on the kind of map that we are generating, that we will have let's say a better map, and the map will be drawn. The map will be there. Anyone who runs a marathon or whatever knows that you just get the software from the organizers, and they will not only show you exactly what the track that you did according to the information that you passed to them, but they will also show where you were faster, where you were slower, and so on and so forth. All information that is obtained from the sensors that we have in our pockets when we have our mobile phone. What else? And then, of course, all the graphics for computing, broadband communication. Nothing here makes sense if we're not able to connect to the internet and connect to the internet fast, to push the data that we are collecting to to the net, and in other cases to get it back. Then he mentions a few concepts here: spatial data infrastructure, patchworks, humans as sensors. Humans as sensors is one of those terms that we'll have to define. And it has not been well defined. I think some authors will talk about humans as sensors, saying that the fact that we have a cell phone in our pocket means that we are sensors already. Others will say no. In that sense, the sensor is your cell phone. It's not you. Some authors will consider that humans are sensors when they are actively including information in a system. Okay? So, for example, Valmir Mark is one of our students here at the Applied Computing School. Is now working in his master's thesis, and his project involves, I think I've already mentioned that to you, populating maps with accessibility information, so that people that are in wheelchairs or blind people can go around in an easier way that they can do today. Maybe this will relate well with the other papers that where we talk about, for example, the happy path, the happy way, instead of the fastest or easiest way to go from one place to the other. You may go through a more beautiful way, and you could also decide to go through a more accessible way. In fact, that was where he had the hint when we were discussing these papers last year. It was when he thought, well, maybe if we populate another layer of information in a VGI with information that could help wheelchair citizens to know if they will find a footpath that is more suitable to them, we can make this the life of these people easier, right? Then he mentions citizen science, another term that maybe we could and should include there in our wiki, right? What is citizen science? It's communities or networks of citizens who act. Let me just go a little further here. Oh, what did I do here? Second. No. Okay, it's where's that? Yeah, communities or networks of citizens who act as observers in some domain of science. And then he says that citizen science is not always necessarily very easy, because in many cases you need to train those citizens so that they become good helpers of science. For example, if you want information on land use, land cover, or where is that? Or soil class, you need people with good knowledge, right? Sometimes I'm driving here to the west of Paraná and I see a crop and I say, what is that? Is that black beans or soya? Or I don't know the difference, right? I'd need to be trained if I were to be someone collecting that information and including it in a map, right? But I can, although I don't have that training, I could easily help a system that was just checking if the name of a street was correct or not in a map, because it's easy for me to just go to the corner and see what is written there and say, look, this street is named wrongly in the map, the actual name is this other one. Or so here, names, place names, street names, and other well-defined geographic features. These do not require any training. So when we wish to involve the crowds in our collective intelligence ventures, we should think what would be the level of knowledge, specific knowledge that is required. If we need a lot of specific knowledge, it will probably be a little more difficult because we'll have to train people, and training is an additional cost to the users, right? They say, well, I would be happy to, I would like to help, but I don't have the time to go through training if training takes 2 hours, 2 days, 2 months, or whatever. Right? But there are other things that are very easy to, and anyone could do, and people will many times be happy to do for free. A little further ahead in the paper, he discusses a paper. I don't think that we have anyone here who's specifically interested in agriculture, but notice this interesting topic here, precision agriculture, where you have maps with information maybe of the crops that are there, and maybe with information of even having some informed data included there, information about, well, this part of the property here is lacking, I don't know, calcium or some mineral. Another part isn't, and you can really be very detailed with respect to that, and then when you put your machinery there to work, it knows exactly, well, from this point on, the kind of product that I will sprinkle is different to what I had before. I may be saying something that doesn't make sense here, but there is this possibility of using VGI here for making agriculture a more precise business, and that would be a field for someone who has that kind of interest eventually. In fact, I hope that the texts that we had for today are texts that are already giving you ideas of projects. One of the things that we'll focus on later today in the second half of the class is going to the projects area there and trying to refine, if we have already written something there, try to refine project ideas, try to include project ideas, and trying to help colleagues that already have some project ideas to better shape those ideas so that they become good projects. And then after discussing all these things, he will get into discussion of some issues. Right? Why do people do this? Their motivation. We'll study motivation specifically. There is one of the topics in which we'll talk about motivation. We've already talked about love, glory, and money. We've already seen Nambi-san and Nambi-san talking about pragmatic benefits and social, the intent to socialize with other people, and so on and so forth. So there are several different motivations here. He very freely talks about some motivations like self-promotion, depending on the situation, and well, many users volunteer. Where is this? Where is this here? Many users volunteer information to Web 2.0 sites as a convenient way of making it available to friends and relations, irrespective of the fact that it becomes available to all. Remember, this is it has been used that way. People include information. I'm going to have a barbecue for my friends, and then I go to open maps and include Alexandre's house, right? And that information is there because I want to make it easier for my friends to arrive to the place. But then I've already included a piece of information that will be there available to anyone else in the future. And then it also says, well, it's talking specifically about the OpenStreetMaps, may derive a certain another possible reason or possible motivation for people to collaborate. For example, in OpenStreetMap may derive a certain personal satisfaction from seeing their own contributions appear in the patchwork. He calls this a patchwork because each one puts a little patch into the system, and at the end we have a big blanket, right? And from watching the patchwork grow in coverage and detail. But there can be no question of self-promotion here because it's essentially an anonymous project, right? Like Wikipedia also, right? If you're writing something on Wikipedia, it's not going to say that it was you who did that. So you're not going to do that for glory. You're definitely not going. You're not going to do that for money. Then, if you still write something for Wikipedia, it's probably going to be for love. Okay. Authority and assertion. He claims here that, of course, we had the cartographers had the authority. Google was not a company that had any knowledge of building maps or anything in the past, but to some extent, we now give it the authority of writing maps, and we believe in it. It could be for several different reasons, because he says here, well, we already think that they're successful doing something else, search engines, so why not consider that they're also good at building maps? It's a little like, well, that guy is already a good architect, so why not allow him to operate my heart? He's probably also a good medical doctor. As I said before, building maps has become much easier than it was in the past, and I'm sure Google has hired many cartographers to help build the algorithms that it uses these days to do this. It is not a human thing any longer, as it is just a computer algorithms.
Or maybe use data from OpenStreetMap.
As well, yeah. And they also, of course, use information that is made available in other initiatives, like Open.
I say this because I used OpenStreetMaps once, and I draw some lines there, some streets on a place that wasn't in the field.
And then you saw those.
Like 2 months after, I realized that information was available on Google Maps.
Have you sent them the bill? Send them and say, oh, look, this is.
Yeah. I should have informed OpenStreetMap because that's illegal.
Is it?
Yeah, because they said it was illegal because OpenStreetMap's data should only be used on OpenStreetMaps.
Or at least, it's let's say any open initiative in general, they have an agreement that if you participate on that, if you use that information, or if you include information there, or if you want to withdraw information from there, you probably have to make it open as well. Yeah, so in that way, you can't.
And also because Google Maps may charge if you want to build a system over it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not fair because they're making money of something that someone did it for free.
Yeah, but again, this is why I'm so critical sometimes, that there's so much that we do for free and we do with one intention, and then we see that was captured and used in a different intention. And when that different intention was something open and free, probably we wouldn't mind, at least if we agree with the objectives. But when someone is profiting from that, we feel a little like someone is trying to make me feel like a fool, right? But notice that's what we do most of the time. We make fools of ourselves whenever we help Facebook get richer, or even Google get richer. They don't pay us anything for that except giving us a little candy, right? There's always a little candy. And I have to agree that many times the little candy is big enough for us to keep helping them, even knowing that they're the ones that are profiting and that we only get the little candy, right? Okay, so then what else? He talks a little bit about well, he talks here about this risk, in this part of the text here. He talks a little bit about the risk or even the inevitability of sabotage in open systems, and other uses that are not necessarily aligned with the common interest. That could be, for example, the case of when you do an effort to help open street maps, and you find out that that was also appropriated by Google afterwards. This is, let's say, not necessarily the common interest. Although Google provides a service to us, it provides a service the way it wishes to, and it can stop at any time, and the information that we've made available is going to be there for their use the way they wish. So in this part of the text here, there's a little concern about this. That's a topic that we'll discuss further in one of our next classes. And then he talks about the digital divide. I think this is becoming a little, well, he wrote this in 2007, right? In 2007, I agree, most people did not have a smartphone. Nowadays, I think people that do not have a smartphone do not have a smartphone because they don't want to have a smartphone in most cases, unless those really radical ones. The other day, I met a friend for a beer after class at 7 o'clock. They're close to where I live, and then this wheelchair person came to us asking, well, his wheelchair was really wrecked, and he was asking if we could help him buy a new wheelchair. I think that's also collective intelligence. It's at least it's crowdfunding what he was doing in a not very efficient way, begging, you know. But as I was interested in, of course, as I was thinking about Valmir's work, well, not because I didn't do it for the money. I gave him some money, but I was really interested in asking him a few questions. And I was concerned if someone that was begging for money to buy a new wheelchair would have a smartphone that would be required to use the system that we are developing, right? And he said, oh yes, no, we all, and I said, no, everyone today has a, and he showed it, his smartphone was better than mine. Not that mine is a reference. It used to be a Nokia until 4 months ago, and it was not a smartphone. So it was someone who was finding it difficult to buy a new wheelchair, which I think should be his priority number one, but who had a smartphone on his pocket. And he said, yes, and I use it a lot. And he said, yes, I use Google Maps and so on and so forth to find my ways around. So talking about the digital divide is probably has to be done in a different way these days. Maybe the digital divide is not necessarily having access to the technology. It's probably more like what you do with the technology you have access to, right? I would say that there is still definitely a digital divide, but the digital divide is actually an educational divide. Some people will be able to do a lot more, or will be able to do more interesting things with the technology they have in hands, and other people will just have access to the technology but will use it in a way that will lead to manipulate. They will probably be more manipulated than actually benefiting from it, right? Although I'd say the candy has been good enough, right? they have been giving us candy in a way that we are all pleased. So I'm not saying that that guy was not benefiting and that society was cheating him, imposing him uses that, or making him have uses that were not good for him. I'm just saying that probably if we had to talk about digital divide from now on, it's not going to be about the equipment itself. It would have to be researching the ways that we use that equipment that maybe could be different depending on our enfim, on the digital divide. Okay. Okay, I think this is what I had to say about this. I hope that if Mr. Goodchild ever watches our class, that he's not too upset on what I said of his paper. I still found it pleasurable to read. I think there is a lot of information there. It's good information. If I didn't think it was good information, we wouldn't be discussing it here. But I think that most of the information that he shows there, considering that he's talking freely about them and that he doesn't provide scientific sources for that information, it's more like an opinion. It may be a very informed opinion, which helps us go and look for the sources that could support even his arguments, right? But I just would like to say it's not a paper that you'll say, wow, I like the paper. You may have liked the content, but I would say, I like the paper, I will clone the format. The format is not the best format for, at least for someone who's doing theoretical, empirical research, okay? Gee, we're late today. It's 9:42 and we just read the first paper. So, but let's go a little faster. Second work for today is reality mining. It's actually more like it seems to be like this technology review seems to be more like a journal, definitely not an academic journal. This is not an academic paper. It's not only much shorter than we would expect for an academic paper, but it's more like it seems that the journalist went there, talked to Sandy Pentland, who was the researcher, and then wrote a report on that, right? But there are some interesting things. These guys at the MIT are trying to mine reality based on the information that we leave behind. Reality mining is another term that I think we should include in our definitions. And it's interesting that they claim that reality mining is, let me find it here. Reality mining is all about paying attention to patterns in life and using that information to help with things like setting privacy patterns, sharing things with people, notifying people, basically to help you live your life. Well, I myself I prefer not to be helped to live my life. I should, although I recognize there are things that make life easier. The problem is that it makes it life easier, but we start giving life away, right? Life is not necessarily there to be easy, just easy. So I have some concerns about this kind of perspective. But anyway, it's the definition that they have for reality mining. I think it's also tricky because reality mining may be there to make your life easier or more convenient or whatever, but it may also be used for other purposes that are somehow hidden here, right? Sensors, and he says that this has been done for quite a while, but before it was not being done for people's lives. It was done, for example, here by means of sensors in manufacturing plants that tell operators when equipment is faulty and cameras on highways that monitor traffic flow. He says it's just that now reality mining is getting personal, right? It's getting to help people live their lives, not just help managers make sure that the plants that they're running are efficient. He says here that we can collect more varied data thanks to devices such as GPS chips and track location. We became human sensors, as has been already discussed in the other paper. And then they talk about a little bit about this guy's project, and it's basically when two people get close to each other and their Bluetooth is on, they have an app, they've developed an app that notice, okay, this person that you know, that you relate to, and also is close to you, and then they say, well, you can you can accurately categorize the people in your address book as friends, family members, acquaintances, or co-workers, right? This is a good candy, right? It would be good if you, and it's not, notice that it's a clever research here, because he says, well, if I meet Silvio every day, if my cell phone is close to his cell phone from 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the afternoon, I can almost for sure say that we are co-workers, right? And then if we go to different places afterwards, and if we don't meet in the evenings or weekends, yes, we are definitely only co-workers. People that I meet only on weekends, maybe friends or relatives. You don't need a lot of intelligence to build an algorithm that will tell from this data collected about mobile phones being close to each other, who is a friend, who's an acquaintance, who's a co-worker, and so on. And they say, we'll give you a good candy here, right? We'll give you some convenience. Instead of you each time having to say, okay, I will share data with this person, or I'll share this specific kind of data with this person, we'll do that automatically for you. This is where I say that, okay, it's helping life to some extent, it's making it more convenient. But at the same time, the system is living my life, right? Because I'm not even deciding who I want to share information with or not. It's my behavior that is being coded, and it seems that the system, it's at least it's something for us to reflect about. But anyway, it's presented, and it's I even wrote here, well, this is interesting research to be done. Maybe we should clone some of these, and we could do some experiments about this, the same way as these guys did. And then notice some more candy here. Most epidemiology models don't back up their predictions with detailed data on where and with whom people spend their time. The addition of relationship and proximity data would make these models more accurate. So that seems good, right? So I share my private data with agencies, government agencies that will monitor if I was close to someone who has hepatitis, and then when someone is diagnosed, I can track other people that were close and diagnose them faster as well. It's definitely a very good candy, but at what price if we don't have regulation that makes sure that this data is not going to be used for other purposes as well, right? And the thing is, even if we have regulation, do we have reasons to believe that people will respect regulation, right? Can regulation be enforced? So sometimes, the candy seems, this is an interesting, I think I can swallow that. But but you have to think also of...
Health plans should be very interested in
Exactly, yeah. Health plans, knowing about our health history, will make it much easier for them to say, yes, I accept your plan, or sorry, there's no plan for you, or it will cost much more. Isn't it better that this becomes a lottery to be solved by the whole society, and we don't know how much risk we don't know the risk of having a heart attack or anything personally, but we know that a percentage of us will have that. Isn't it be better? Wouldn't it be better if it was still an information, at least for, let's say, for paying sake, for us to pay for for that kind of insurance or plan or of course. On the other hand, the candy would be, well, if we know that you suffer, you have some cardiac problem, we can check even by your heartbeats. We can monitor that day and night during your whole life, and make sure that you get assistance faster when and if you need it. So notice it's very difficult to think which way to go. There's always some good arguments to give away information, but how will this information be used? Will it be used in favor of me or against me? Who should I believe, right? See, they want to monitor even the change in the tone of our voice to diagnose depression, for example. Well, it's good. It's helping me live my life, but it would be better if we still had time to share with friends and family, so that our friends and family could say, look, you're sounding different, instead of being monitored by our mobile phones or... Right? It's just we have to think of the ways this convenience sometimes brings a solution to a problem that we didn't have, or if we had, maybe we should check and solve the problem that we had before that. Isn't there anyone who would be able to notice that I'm depressed before a machine has to do that? And then we get to that point where I couldn't do anything else than write a remark here. What a jerk, when the guy said, while the promise of reality mining is great, the idea of collecting so much personal information naturally raises many questions about privacy. It's crucial that behavior logging technology not be forced on anyone. Has it been forced on anyone? Well, I think it has been forced on all of us, and we all said, yes, that's the only way I can go, because that's the only alternative that I was given. So, he's a scientist. I'm not concerned at all with the flexibility of Mr. Goodchild in writing his paper, a senior professor or whatever, do what he wants. But a scientist needs to do better than this with respect to discussing privacy. Well, there are some privacy issues, so nobody should be obliged to. We are all obliged to, if that's the way that we go as a mass of people. For now, here at the end, though, Petland is excited about the potential of reality mining to simplify people's lives. All of the devices that we have are completely ignorant of the things that matter most, he says. They may know all sorts of stuff about web pages and phone numbers, but at the end of the day, we live to interact with other people. Exactly. So now he's saying, yeah, we live to live, and he wishes that we use all this technology to support and to replace life in many ways. Anyway, but again, although I don't like the way he's naive about his research, I do think that there are some interesting ideas here that can help you think of ways to go as well. Okay, and then we have the two. I'll have to be a little faster to discuss this. The last paper, large-scale study of city dynamics, which is here. And before that, very quickly, this again, it's not the paper itself. It's just a report on the paper. Forget the shortest route across a city. New algorithms finds the most beautiful. And here there's a lot of interesting possibilities for you. We could have the most beautiful, the least dangerous, living in a country like Brazil. If we have a layer of information on a map about crime, where people were mugged, for example, and if we're walking somewhere, we could decide to have that information weighted and included in the decision of where we're going to walk, right? If you decide to walk just in Curitiba, for example, based only on Google Maps information, you may go through risky areas where locals, and mainly if you're a tourist, where locals would probably prefer to avoid. Okay? But if we have a layer, a security layer on top of the map, and that's used to help decide, we could have a safer route. And we can think of several different things. While I was reading this, I was thinking, for example, that we could, for a tourist, we could say, how much time do you have in the city? 2 hours? 5 hours? Well, how much are you, do you enjoy walking? How much would you like to walk? 5 kilometers? 10 kilometers. I can easily walk 10 kilometers a day, and I enjoy walking, so if I go visit a city, I think that walking 10 kilometers in a day is very reasonable, right? So you write that, and then depending on what you wrote as the distance that you're willing and the time that you have, maybe the system or an app could tell you a good route to take based on interesting things to see. And in this forget the shortest route across a city, they give ideas of, they were thinking about a beautiful route. They originally thought, they crowdsourced information, they showed originally they showed pictures of different places and asked people to say this is more beautiful or less beautiful, and then based on that information to build an additional layer on top of a map of London. They made it possible for people to choose a more beautiful way. The problem that they saw with this approach, with this methodology, was that it was not very scalable, right? You would have to ask people in whatever city to first say if this is beautiful or that is beautiful, or not even people that lived in the city, but people to say this is beautiful or this is not beautiful, and then they would be able to build this layer on an extra layer on a map to be used for decision making. But then they thought, well, we can do that, for example, checking where people have taken photographs and posted them to Flickr or Instagram or whatever, right? Usually people take pictures of interesting things. Not necessarily beautiful, but interesting things. And then when you can check how many people photographed something in a street, you don't even need to know what is there to be photographed. But you know that many people photograph that. Okay, so that's definitely a place that you want your visitor to go through. Right? Interesting possibilities here of building additional layers to maps that are already available, and by doing that, allowing the creation of routes that that provides different value to different events or different items included in this layer. Okay? And then finally, we get to Thiago Silva's paper with some of his colleagues from when he was a doctoral student at Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais. This is a paper that, well, again, I talked about the format of the other paper, and then I have to say that the abstract in this paper also only includes context up to here, and then after context, it provides an explanation of what it does or its objective, but there is no information about the methodology used, neither information about the results. This is actually a paper where they are discussing things that they did in several other papers, right? But they could have provided us here with a little more information on how they would help us agree with their argumentation that location-based social media systems, such as Instagram and Foursquare, can act as valuable sources of large-scale sensing, providing access to important characteristics of human social behavior, much more quickly than traditional methods. They could say, we'll do this by, and then give explaining quickly here what the means that they would use were, right? But anyway, they talk about participatory sensor networks, location-based social media. A lot of terms appear here that could also go to our definitions, and hopefully if they're not there, we could include them there after our break. Right? Notice that, for example, when I say explaining how they did something on page 2, they give us some hints here about how they do things. For example, they say, in this direction, we have studied the properties of PSNs derived from two Instagram data sets, Instagram 1 and 2, two from Foursquare 1 and 2, one from Bright Kites, and one from Gowalla, comprising over 30 million registers, and so on and so forth. In fact, I don't remember if they mentioned this Bright Kites and this Gowalla later on in the paper. Do you remember that? Yeah, maybe. Well, it's not very difficult to find, right? Just check there. See if Bright Kite appears more than once, or if it only appears there. It appears in other places. No? Just that time. So yeah. So these are the things that we as editors become very critical about. This should not have passed an editor saying, well, okay, they say that they're going to use all those, because I remember that many times they use the Instagram and the Foursquare databases. Those other two here don't appear somewhere else, so they shouldn't appear here either, right? One of the things that is important when we're writing our academic reports is they have to be really rigorous. And I'm sure that if you look at my papers, you'll find the same sort of mistakes, right? I'm not here pointing out at other people's mistakes and saying that it shouldn't be published. Of course, there's a lot of interesting stuff here, and we can't keep the paper forever until we find that it's really perfect, because then it's not interesting any longer. Others have done better or have done what we did, so we have to be sort of fast but we should at least be convinced when we send a paper to a conference or to a journal that we believe that it's perfect, right? If we should never send a paper to see, let's see if they accept it. You know why? Because sometimes they do accept it. And then you'll be embarrassed afterwards, right? I know that we're all pushed to publishing, right? Publish or perish, right? But remember, that's just the first stage, publish or perish. But if you're just counting numbers, that's important. But if you want to be acknowledged for the quality of what you do, it shouldn't be just numbers. So it's better, sometimes it's better to wait a little longer, make sure that what you're sending for publication is good, because there's always a chance that they will publish your paper that is not, that you yourself still think that is not at its best shape, right? And besides, in a world that moves so fast, everyone is in a rush. Reviewers, editors, everyone is pressed to do their work faster than they did in the past. Slow down, right? Find some time to do things the old ways, and that will probably provide you with the reward of having a better work. Users are more likely to share data in a restaurant than a supermarket. Do you agree with that? Of course. I mean, of course, when I say of course, yes, that's what we see. Maybe it shouldn't be like that. I always find really intriguing to know why some friends of mine are so keen on taking photographs of the food that they're eating, right? Wow, another plate of food. Yes, we eat every day, I know, but why do we have? Why does the rest of the world have to know about that? So maybe we should have more postings from supermarkets. Well, look, guys, there is this, there's this huge promotion on milk, right, or whatever. Beer. Yeah, I thought of beer, but I said milk. Right? Because maybe someone would say that, so what, right? And then things that they found that there are seasonal behaviors that are easily noticed. Notice that most of the results that they got are not impressive in the way that they show what we probably would already expect, right? We expect people to go to work during the day and go home, and go from work to a place where they can have a meal or go home afterwards. All of what they found here is somewhat expected. But at the same time, it confirms things. It shows differences between, they say that they're cultural differences. I mean, Thiago and all his colleagues are computer science guys. I would say a little slower there, right? Maybe at least you have to, as a reader, I have to be convinced that there are patterns. I have no reason to think that they're not cultural issues, but I would like to see some theory to which that could be related before someone simply assumes that it's cultural issues. There's a good chance that this may be just, or could be just, one of those things, like a spider without legs is death. You know this joke? And the scientist went there, pulled one of the legs of a spider and said, jump. And it still had 7 legs, so it jumped, right? Then it took another one, jump. Assuming that the spider understood Portuguese or English, right? And the spider still, let's say not jumped, but moved around. Pulled the 3rd leg, jumped, and it still moved. And then when the scientist pulled the last leg and said jumped, it didn't jump any longer. And then the conclusion was that pulling the last leg made the spider deaf, right? I understand that, and I'm not challenging their result here. I'm saying that we should not assume things without further investigating, further testing, because there is a risk that we're missing something there. But this is just as being overcritical here. I think that I agree that the reason is this, and they show, look, and it's impressive the way that when you compare some of the city images, is it city image, the name that they give to? Is it city? I don't know how they call it. I think it's city images that they call the, well, those graphs that they generate for each city. When you compare, no. Where is that? City image, for example. Let me see what page is this. Page 4. Let me go to page 4 here. He surely mentioned city image before that, but here on page 4 they say, city image is a promising technique to enable a better understanding of the city dynamics. Right? And it's interesting because when you see the city image of London and well, maybe that's not exact. I don't recall. I've seen some other work that they did. It was not London, but you think Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo, they're more similar in many ways than if you think they're similar among themselves, and maybe London and Sydney in Australia, they're also similar in many ways. So there is. I'm not here fighting the idea that it's there are cultural issues there, but there are also other issues when we're talking, for example, about people moving from one place to the other. Rio de Janeiro, for example, is a city that is spread along the coast, so movement will tend to be along that direction as well, because the city is sort of like that. Curitiba, for example, we have these bus lines, the north, south, and east, west, that really carry a lot of people. I wouldn't be surprised that if we mapped this movement in the city of Curitiba, it would show that movement happens mainly in those lines. And it's not cultural necessarily. Sometimes it's infrastructural, sometimes it's geographical. In Rio, it may be geography that determines how it works. What is probably more cultural is, for example, having a beer after work. This could be more cultural. Some countries or some people from some areas may have that in their culture, and others don't. But that could also be weather. When we claim that here in Curitiba we're not as social as in other parts of Brazil, that we don't enjoy outside activity as people enjoy in other parts of Brazil, well, that may turn out to become cultural after a while, but I think before that, the weather doesn't help, and the weather is not as inviting for outdoor activities, at least as compared to Rio and to other coastal cities, warmer cities in the country. Okay. So, well, this paper is full of detail. Considering that we've already 15 minutes past the time, I will not go through all the detail that is available here, but I hope that it has given you not only insights, but has shown you how much information we leave behind and how powerful this information is if it is analyzed and converted into knowledge that can then be used for decision making. This was I think this was at least the purpose of us choosing this paper to be part of today's class. Well, we'll have a break now. And I don't know if you have any comments, anything that you want to say before we're going to break. So we'll have a break, and then when we come back, today we're not only going to we'll focus on the Moodle, discussing ideas that appear here, but I would try to put more efforts into first looking for definitions that appeared here and that we could include in our wiki glossary, and also start thinking or putting more effort into thinking about possible projects involving collective intelligence that you wish to develop, or maybe if you're here just for the general knowledge of this course, and if you don't intend to do that, at least that you think that others could develop. I just would ask you to, if you don't have the intention of going on and developing the idea that you're giving there, make sure that you say that so that others feel free to grab your idea, right, and work on it. But if you and at the same time, we will respect whoever writes an idea and says, well, that's what I want to do. We'll all try to provide our own comments, but we will say, yes, that's you have a patent there. The remaining of us are not going to deal with that because you've already shown interest, okay? All right, so I'll be back in 20 minutes.